Hello, I've just read chapter 38 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. So we pick up where we left off at the end of part 2, where Larenth said feral droids, and everyone's silent after that. What does Den say? And Den asks if they can leave now, and Jax shakes his head saying he still has to complete Master Peel's mission. And Den just lashes out at that point. He just says that he knows he's got to complete his mission, but will we stop being such a foolish Jedi and perhaps someone take that lightsaber and any other sharp objects from you? Um, and then Den gets shot down. Well, not literally shot down, but he gets some. He's shut up by I-5 of all people, who tells him enough, Den, and that really upsets Den. Because again, I-5 he views him as a friend, and I-5 he's already starting to feel jealous of Jax, so now I-5 is telling Den to of course stay quiet. And he feels loads of emotions coming over him. But eventually he's able to just get control of himself and says about if there is such a thing as feral droids, then he says that this might be a place that they might return to. Jackson agrees. He tells I-5 and Larenth to head up the back, of course. Den's going to be in the middle, and he says that Jax says that he and Nick will lead, and then they realise that Nick is gone. And then wonders, oh, they've got him. And Jax and Larenth say no, the feral droids haven't got him, otherwise they would have felt it in the Force. And they say that they've got to find Nick. So Larenth and I-5 lead up the back, while and Larenth says that I'll ring up the rear, you're safer in the middle, and then just thinks, so at least someone cares. And they walk, and Jax leads, and they of course head out to try and find Nick, who again just disappears. We know why, but they don't. Then we cut over to Caird and Sheezel, and Caird's trying to think of a way to get out, and he just knows he can't. He knows there's no way he can get out of this situation. He'll just have to wait until his handcuffs are removed, and just hope that he's in a situation where we can do something in that case. And they go, I think they say they go deeper, do they? They round a corner and open up a chamber, and she's always absolutely shocked, and his skin goes red because it's in massive amounts of destruction. All the scientists are dead, etc. And he just says the Silicians told me that all the feral droids were, he doesn't get to finish, but we know what he's going to say, that they were destroyed. And then Bug Eyes says someone's coming. And it's Jax. It's not explicitly said to be Jax, but we know it's Jax because it's Caird is described as looking at him and evaluating that he's wearing a Spacer's uniform outfit. Which we are told earlier in the book Jax is wearing something that looks like a Spacer's outfit, so we know it's Jax. And Jax, he's trying to just from what I gather of Jax's character, he's trying to make an entrance, trying to, be like what you see on the movies, but you can just tell it just doesn't quite work out for Jax properly. He's not really making a big entrance because he just says, well, he says, Prince Sheezel. He glanced at the droids, and the famous 1040 aka Bug Eyes. My, what are the odds? Jax is just saying that to try and make a fanciful entrance, and it's everyone's just going to be eye rolling him. That's kind of situation he's in. And then we got over to Rhinann, who's now in a ship, who's now in Vader's ship. and there's some stormtroopers, and we're told that Rhinann's really just terrified now. And we're told that it's not unusual that he accompanies Vader, because again, he's his personal aide, he's his aide-de-camp. But and he's at least happy that they're going to he's going to the other side of the planet with stormtroopers because he knows what they're like. And we're told that Vader hasn't yet got the signal from Nick, and that he's just following the tracker under his skin, so it is there. Um, and we're told that Rhinann's just absolutely terrified. Pardon me. And that we're told that he likes listening to stories of adventure. He doesn't necessarily like going on stories of adventure. He doesn't like necessarily getting partaking in adventure. And we're told that he has no time to put the holocron back in his conapt. And that he had no idea what was inside the holocron, and we saw that he didn't get it to try and sell it on. He had gotten it to try and protect himself to see if it had anything to protect, to see if it could offer anything that could protect him from Vader. And he knows that it was a pretty silly idea because it may not have anything. For as far as Rhinann knows, it haven't been stiff in thousands of years. We know it's only 1,000 years, but Rhinann's under the impression it's thousands. So, and as far as he knows, the information in there could be impertinent, may not be relevant anymore. And as far as he knows, it could just be recipes in there, nothing that could actually help him. And we're told that he had done it irrationally, and we're told that that's not how an Aloman usually acts. And we're told that he'd breaking his own he doesn't even know if he can access the holocron. And I'm just going to read out the last bit here. He knew all of this, yet he still absconded with it, had stolen Imperial property, which in and of itself was a shocking abrogation of his own personal standards. No, there was no excuse whatsoever for his actions, save for that of naked fear, and the mere fact that he was so desperate upset about him, almost as much as a desperation itself. And that's where we end the chapter. So yeah. Den, again, you understand why Den's getting so frustrated. And again, he continues to be funny, even in his frustrations. I think Den is a really interesting point of view character. I think all the characters so far, with maybe the exception of Larenth, have had something to give to the plot. I think Larenth, she generally hasn't quite come into her own yet. She still has some character, but I think she's probably the least developed of all the main characters at the moment. But I think anyway, back to Den. I think Den. I think it's really interesting, given he gives a everyday person point of view to, a mission that typically, we see through the hero stories, and so I think he adds quite an interesting point of view in that. I think sometimes that him having a point of seeing the chapters from his point of view sometimes hinders the chapters. Again, like I think we still need to learn a bit more about Jackson, and I still stand by that fact that chapter 4 should have just been a day in the life of Jackson and him probably involving Larenth in that chapter as well, just so we can kind of get to know what their characters were. Because I think Jax, I've said this a million times already, but Jax took a while to come into his own. I think Larenth, she's got a little bit of character, but she kind of just feels like she's there. She's more like the voice of reason. She's a little bit prideful, etc. There's a little bit I can sort of say about her character, but I can't really say a whole lot about her character. I do hope she maybe comes a little bit more into her own in the second book. I think I'm betting, I know Rhinann dies, and I'm betting that Bo is gonna die in this book. And I'm also going to bet, and I think, and I know Caird isn't in the next book, so I hope that means there's more time for Larenth in the next book, just to kind of develop her out. But anyway, back to Den. Yeah, he's a very interesting viewpoint, because again, he's the everyday person in this, adventurous, in this adventure, and it adds a very interesting viewpoint. And again, you see how he is extremely upset about I5, and reasonably so. And he's also, also you can kind of see that his frustration with Jax coming through. I think Dane is just, again, a really great character in this book. I don't really have a whole lot else to say on him that I haven't said before, but I think he's a very interesting character. Well, just a very fun character. But yeah. Then we have Caird and what's going on. Really, there's not a whole lot to talk about with that part of the chapter, so I'm probably just going to skip over it. So Rhinann, I'm shocked that Rhinann did not get the holocron to sell it on, because again, it was set up that he's going to try and leave Coruscant. Of course, if you're going to get the holocron, logistically, you're going to sell it, aren't you? Why is he getting it so he can actually escape Coruscant? So why is he getting it to try and protect himself from Vader? But it is also an interesting thing about his character, how he's usually very clever, very thorough. And it just shows, and we're just told here about how he went into that with no plan at all. He just stood it out of irrational fear and trying to find a way to protect himself. And it just shows how much he's falling apart, But, and yeah, you just see how much Rhinann is terrified of Vader. It's not like we haven't seen how much he's terrified before, but yeah, it's very, very, it adds another layer to his character about how he's very methodical, very in-depth. His brain that goes very in-depth in things failed to properly plan out this thing, so yeah, it's a very intriguing character, Rhinann. Again, I don't know if he's in the next book or not. I don't know if he dies in this book or if he dies in another book. I'm kind of hoping that at least one. I'm kind of hoping that he may die, just so we have a bit more time with Larenth. Again, I think the thing is with Larenth, if Caird's in the next book, she's also definitely going to fill in his place. I think the thing is with Larenth, we just kind of need a little bit more on her character, we've got little bits of what she's like, in her, when she first appears in, I think it was chapter, what was it? Yeah, chapter 13. Um, it talks about how her damaged Leku, she kind of lets swing, like kind of just keeps let free in a perverse pride, as it says. We see that she's a bit of the voice of reason. And that again, she's we haven't really seen much of this outside of that first chapter, but she's a little bit more of that. She's kind of a mentor to Jax, in the voice of reason. She kind of fills in any gaps that Jax has, but she isn't necessarily a mentor. She's not a mentor, but she has little mentorish things that occur when she acts as that voice of reason for Jax whenever he's not quite on the same page. She kind of catches him up, or acts as she fills in the gaps for Jax. Um, it's just we haven't really seen a whole lot of her because we've been focusing so much on Caird and Den and I5 and Rhinann and Jax. that we really haven't had a whole lot of time for Labyrinth. So I do hope that I hope that next book we get a bit more of her character. You know, I think hopefully next book there's a little bit more to her. Pardon me. Because I don't think we're going to have much time to fit character any more of character stuff in for this book. You know, we've only got 7 more chapters, so I really don't think there's going to be a whole lot of time to develop Rhinann's character, and I don't really think now will be appropriate. Just because again we're almost at the end of this book. So I think next book it will be. I think next book will be hopefully we can develop Labyrinth out a bit. I really do hope we do get her developed out a little bit, fleshed out a little bit more, because one, she's actually got an interesting character. You know, there's some interesting, there's some interesting bits to her, like the Grey Paladin, and again, really like how she deflects blaster bolts with her own blaster bolts. That was something that completely struck me, and I absolutely love that little detail. So she has interesting things about her. And little things about her, like how she doesn't like being separated from her weapons, and how it kind of makes her feel a bit uncomfortable. I guess in a way vulnerable. But I hope but we haven't really have spent a lot of time on Labyrinth. Most of what we see of Labyrinth's character outside of chapter 13 is what we see from is how we see her from every other character's perspective. I don't think we've ever had a chapter specifically from Labyrinth's perspective yet. Um, each and every other chapter though we have had from another character's perspective. I think maybe I5 we haven't had a chapter from his perspective from, but I don't think we've really needed to because he's been able to bounce off of Dender, and they've I5 has always kind of been was always kind of leading Dender and trying to find Jack. So I suppose in I5's case it doesn't really matter that we haven't had a chapter from his point of view, but I think Labyrinth, I hope we just get a little bit more development for it. And again, I think that's kind of why with chapter 4, we should have just had a day in the life with Jax and maybe involve Labyrinth there. That way she's not only set up for later in the book, but we can also learn a little bit more about what she's like as a character. And Jax has someone to bounce off of, and we learn a little bit more about both characters' personalities, you know. I think that's maybe just what we needed, and we just didn't get that. But anyway, I think that I'm going to bring an end to this review because I don't really have much else to say. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I've just read chapter 39 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight, and I think I made a mistake last chapter. I said there was only 7 chapters left. Now there's only 7 chapters left. It was actually 8 chapters last chapter. I got it a bit wrong because next chapter was 39 and I completely forgot 40 existed. So I thought, in my mind there was 39, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45 and 46. I completely forgot 40. So I meant 8 chapters last chapter, not 7. But now we're on to 7 chapters. So it looks like Jax, the Labyrinth, and I5, pardon me, barely get a chance to even get out of the control room because then they hear noise. And Jax says that he senses something, but it's not organic. And I5 corrects him, saying that it's not just one. He's saying that there is at least 4 based on what he's picking up, maybe more. Labyrinth also starts the chapter off saying something is coming. And of course, Dane just says, is anyone really surprised at this? So never mind the rhetorical question. And then looks around and says that there's pretty good odds that they move, that the feral droids moves haven't changed, and that this Noam says that they should probably get out of here, and I5 says it's a little bit too late for that. because his sensors are saying they're blocking the exits. And then can you hear the noise of something being broken down. And everyone hears it. So I5 says that whatever they're going to do, he suggests they do it quickly. And everyone draws their weapons. Jax lights his lightsaber, of course. I5 lifts his fingers. Labyrinth pulls out her blasters, and Jax hands Den his vibro knife from his belt. And of course, Den being Den is incredibly sarcastic, and it's a very typical. And it says, "Terrific," he thought. It was about 12 centimeters long, with a blaze that vibrated fast enough to blur the edge when activated. A vicious and deadly weapon if one were facing an organic opponent. Against a pack of haywire automata, however, maybe I can cut my own head off before one of them gets a chance. And he looks at I5 and says he never thought he'd go out against a bunch of crazy droids, and then he drops the punchline and says that he only thought he'd go out by one. And I5 replies saying that one would never be enough for Den. And Den thinks that maybe there could have been a bit more comforting and sweet farewell, but he knows there's no time for that, and that's when the door gets kicked down. And then we go back to Shizor, and I was completely wrong last chapter. There are two things in this part of the book that completely confused me. Because just based on how it was said earlier, first off, it's not Jax that sees Shizor at all. It's Nick Rostu. So I got that completely wrong. It was Nick that saw that found Shizor, not Jax. I thought it was Jax. It was Nick. To be fair, I'm not sure if Nick's outfits has ever been described at any point in the book. Maybe it has, but I know Jax's outfit is definitely more memorable in its description, and I know it says that he looks like a spacer. So can you really blame me when it said he looked like a spacer? But yeah, it's Nick, and we're told Shizor has his blaster aimed at him, and he's a little bit, doesn't quite know what to do, because rumours say he's with Black Sun. I mean, Shizor's with Black Sun, and that is a master of various forms of unarmed martial arts, as we have to be very careful with how he says, and has to tread lightly. And he knows the control phase Zuwoohama, but he also knows that Shizor can shoot him down much faster than Nick can say Zuwoohama and disarm him. So yeah. So he has to be very clever here. And Shizor questions him, asking how he got here, and says that says that the place is deserted, and Nick says that he's not from around here. He tries to stay nonchalant while his mind tries to figure out a plan. And then he comes to the second shock, which is he hasn't activated the beacon to summon Vader. And I was completely under the impression that he had, because chapter 36 tells us that the beacon is in his clothing, the activation beacon, and it makes a point telling us that he lightly rubs that part of his clothing. Maybe and it's... What? Maybe just need, tell us if he hasn't activated the beacon by doing that. Tell us that he hasn't, because I was completely under the impression that he had, especially since or maybe it's the following chapter. Yeah, it's the following chapter. Especially since that chapter was making a point that he had to do something, that he had to either betray Jax now or it's going to be never. They needed to make that clear, and they did not. Sorry, Michael Reeves, you should have made that a lot more clear. Because I was completely under the impression that Vader was just getting impatient, trying to wait for Nick's signal, and was just going, and Nick had already sent it, and he was going to find it either in this, and then Vader was going to pick it up either at the end of the last chapter, some point in this chapter or next chapter, but no, Nick hasn't even activated it. So that's a bit of a writing problem there. It's a bit, so that was the second shock this chapter gave me. Anyway, Nick tries talking his way through the situation and says that he was sent by Black Sun. And she's also, of course, very skeptical. And Nick says that he was sent. That he said the people that she's all met in the Juggernaut nest earlier. You know, where shortly after he had fought, shortly after she's had fought Caird, and he says that I'll just read this out. Actually, there's another bit here that says that Nick wonders if Shizor might be actually a good ally, because he might be able to help. I'll just read this bit out. Might Shizor somehow be used as an ally against the Dark Lord? A way to save Jax's life and his own by distracting Vader? Unlikely, and even if it was possible, if it ended anywhere short of Vader's death, there was still the danger of part of Harun Kal being decimated. And Nick just has to open his mouth because he figures it's only about 10 seconds before he gets shot, and just says the first thing that comes out of his mouth, and he says that he's come to warn him and that Jax Larenth, he doesn't use their names, but Jax Larenth, Dan and I5, he says that I'm here to warn you, Lord Vader sent a posé after you. They're tracking you and they'll find you very soon. Prince Shizor looks worried. Are you referring to those fools who ran headlong into my droid's fusillade? I didn't think they could still stand, much less pursue me halfway around the world. And Nick says to not dismiss them. And two of them are rogue Jedi. And Shiza asks, "What does Vader want with this?" And then he realizes that then he realizes, and Nick says that yes, he wants the data in Bug Eyes. And she's also skeptical, saying what's in it for him, asking what's in it for Nick, and Nick just says that Black Sun sent him, and she's all trying to verify whether he's telling the truth. Asks, okay, what's the recognition phrase for Bug Eyes? And Nick doesn't know it. And so he tries to, and so with his very weak force connection, he tries to probe Shizor's mind. But he can feel that Shizor's still skeptical, but can feel enough in his mood to be confident in his next reply, which is that he doesn't know it. And that completely brings Shizor's trust over. And he just says, "Phrase? What phrase, Nick?" And Shizor immediately gets to the plan, saying how they're going to ambush the Jedi. They have to get the jump on them. And Nick says that it all leads them to them. And they start making their way through the building, and Nick he doesn't have to look to know that Shizor's got his blaster trained on him as they're making their way over, and Nick's trying to concord a plan to try and he's thinking again that maybe Shizor can be an ally. He can be a powerful ally. He's with Black Sun. He's thinking that if he can alert Jax that there is danger before they get there, They might be able to actually get the drop on Shizor and take the guys for their own, and Jax can complete Peel's mission. And then you could tell how Vader is enlisted him, and they might be able to figure a way out of this, and that's when Nick starts thinking about trying to make an allegiance with Shizor. And I'll just read this last bit out from the chapter. The more we thought about it, the more Nick was amazed and somewhat annoyed that he hadn't sussed all of this out before. Before now, it made perfect sense. It was in all their best interests for him to bring Shizor to the others, but not so they could subdue Shizor. The prince could protect both him and his Gosh against Vader. A sunstruck Gungan could see that, and he could no doubt help Jax hide from Vader as well. Nick felt, and that's when we say that Nick feels a wave of relief even after, and he feels a little bit safer now. And he notices that Shizor's skin starts to go from green to pink. And that's where we end off with Nick and Shizor. We pick back up with Jax and the others, who are all hiding, and 3 droids coming with distinguishing features. That's me. And Jax makes a force leap over them and goes to strike one of them, and his lightsaber gets deactivated. And at first I thought cortosis, but no, it's not clarified if it's cortosis at all. I'm still going to assume it is cortosis, like logistically, that because that's what cortosis does. It pure cortosis. It deactivates the lightsaber. And Jax is left stunned for a moment, and he only has enough time to react to what's about, and only is able to realise what the droid's about to do to him once it's too late. But luckily, the droid gets shot a couple of times. It's not clarified whether it's from Larenth or I-5. I'm going to assume Larenth. And that droid and another droid get shot, disabling them. Get shot in a specific part. What the part was, I don't remember. But they get shot in a specific part, and it deactivates them, paralyzes them, and then Jax is immediately able to ignite his lightsaber again and thrusts his lightsaber into the midsection of another droid, and it deactivates that one. And that's when Jax realises the rust he thought he saw on those droids weren't rust, but blood. And there's a moment of silence, and then that gets stopped by when a blast hits the window, the transparent seal window, and Rhinann goes to look out of it, and she sees that there's a bunch of droids on the assembly line down below, but she can't quite tell how many there are because they're all moving. And that's when a plasma shot comes up to the window again. Narenth says, and one of them has a plasma gun, and then just goes terrific. And that's where we end that chapter. So then, let's just... first off, want to cover how this chapter how the previous chapters maybe could have done a little bit of better clarifying. Because so, again, there were 2 bits in this book, in this chapter, that had more context than the 2 previous chapters of this chapter and chapter 37. In chapter 37, of course, Nick lightly thumbs the part of his clothing that has the beacon, the bit that activates the beacon, and we're told that he lightly thumbs this. I even went back to check if he does, and he does. And it's never made, and in that chapter, it's never made clear that it didn't activate. If anything, it's implied that it did. And And so to be told that it hasn't activated it, that was a massive, confusing shock. It is said that he only lightly thumps it. But you know, if you're gonna, it makes sense that he was only likely to be if he's trying to be discreet. You know, that chapter really could have made it so much more clear as to how much pressure Nick was actually as to whether the beacon actually activated or not. Especially since the whole point in that chapter was telling us how Nick had to make a decision now as to whether to bring Vader over. And it's definitely seemed like he made his decision that he had to bring Vader over now, or he would be risking his gosh. It definitely seems like that chapter really could have done a way better job. I'm not going to blame myself for that because the writing, that was definitely the fault of the writing. I think definitely nothing to do with context, because again the chapter made it very clear that Nick had to make a decision now. That chapter explicitly said he had to make a decision now. We're told about that he thumbs a specific position where the activate of the beacon was. It doesn't say it didn't activate, but it didn't need to, because of course we're going to think, because we're told how it works, and Nick does the motion that was activated. So it definitely was that's completely on the book for not telling us it didn't activate sooner. So yeah, I'm not going to blame myself for that one. The second one, maybe I'll blame myself for, because I'm not entirely, I can't remember if Nick's outfit ever was described. Maybe it was. Him being in a spacer outfit definitely sounds familiar, but it definitely doesn't sound like I can put my finger on when we were told. So yeah, maybe I can maybe blame myself for that one. And honestly, maybe it's maybe a little bit of a fault of the writing for having multiple characters described as being in a spacer outfit, if there were multiple characters, and because Jax is also described as being in one, and it definitely felt like a very Jax thing to say as well. I can also, now that we know it's Nick, I could also see Nick saying what he said in the previous chapter. But anyway, onto this chapter. It's really, again, Zen and I5 have such great banter, and even though Zen isn't specifically satisfied with I5's response to his little joke and farewell, pardon me, you can tell that, you know, he knows it'll suffice, and you can tell, and again, it really does show that even though that they haven't, it's again just shows us their bond again, and it's nice to kind of see a moment where their bond is stronger, because it has been slowly deteriorating since Jax came into the picture for them. Well, say came into the picture, you know, actually, probably since I5 found Jax, it has slowly kind of been deteriorating. So it's nice to see, well, at least from Din's perspective, we haven't really seen it from I5's, but, you know, it's nice to see that moment of strength from their bond again. And again, Zen, he's just so sarcastic and so, you know, grounded. And he has a lot of good humour into his seriousness and of his... Of course, the moments were like... Of course, if you're a normal person in this situation, of course you're going to react like that. You know, and I think he had so much humour in the book. Same with I5. And especially when you know Jax has a pistol, a blaster pistol up his sleeve. He probably still has the two blasters from the Bully Boys. He probably still has them. It's never clarified if he ever actually got rid of them, considering how the plot of the book's gone. It doesn't really look like he would have had much time to put them away. So I'm going to say he probably still has them. So he has at least 3 blasters on his person that he could give to Den, and instead he just gives him his fibro knife, which is a bit funny. To be fair, it is a little bit more accessible, and he'd already ignited his lightsaber, but you know, surely could have just put it into the other hand briefly and pulled out the holes out pistol and given it over to Den, or you know, just taken out one of the Bully Boys masters. But for some reason, no, just giving the vibro knife. So yeah, then Nick, he has a very good plan on trying to turn Shizor over. So yeah, he has a very good plan with that. though I'm not entirely sure if Nick's going to be able to get out of here without having another body piercing injury. Or body piercing surgery. Because she's also started to turn red pink again. And I have a feeling he's probably going to shoot Nick at some point. And poor Nick just can't... He can't go a book without getting some sort of injury. It's mandatory for him at this point to get injured. Um... um... So yes, it will be interesting to see if you know, the little alliance will work out. Then you know, it was actually quite it was quite a surprise actually to see Jax's lightsaber get, you know, turned off by the droid. Again, my immediate thought when I saw that was, oh, cortosis, because that's what cortosis does. It deactivates lightsabers. Usually in Legends though, it's meant to deactivate at least a pure cortosis. Maybe the cortosis isn't pure, but still pure enough to deactivate a lightsaber. It's meant to deactivate it for a few minutes, not a few seconds. So that definitely was a because it was. Isn't it meant to deactivate it for a few minutes? Again, maybe it's just the purity of the cortosis. Maybe it's not completely pure, but still pure enough to deactivate the lightsaber. Because cortosis weave doesn't deactivate lightsabers. The cortosis, I assume, isn't pure enough. So there is that possibility that it is just a little bit more pure than weave, and it winds up being able to deactivate lightsabers, but not for as long. It's never really clarified if they even have cortosis on them. I'm going to assume they do, because again, that's what deactivates lightsabers. But yeah, it was interesting that Jax was able to activate it basically immediately after, and that's kind of more how the Acolyte treated lightsabers. You know, they could be activated shortly after they were turned off by cortosis. They weren't deactivated for a few minutes. So yeah, that of course the Acolyte is canon, not Legends. So yeah, but anyway, yeah, that was interesting. That was definitely interesting. Um, It'll be interesting to see though if it does get clarified if it is cortosis. I'm hoping it does. I am going to assume it is cortosis, but you know, we don't know. Um, is there anything else I want to say on this chapter? I want to say more. Oh, it's because it just it's slipped my mind and it's just come back. I think I'm starting to get Sheezel's plan, as it was said in a chapter. What was it? I'm on 30. I've just said 30 now. In 37, chapter 37. I think he wants to have kids, maybe, you know, kill Perhy, but also get killed in the insane, then replacing with a droid replacement, so he can slowly build up a guaranteed influence with Perhy, with the droid of Perhy, and then, you know, be able to take over. I think that might be what he's gonna do, but I don't know. It's still not a very well explained plan, and it's one of those where we're gonna have to see how it goes and actually to see whether it's effective. I also don't think we may see the fruition of that, because as far as I'm aware, Perhy only appears in 2 books. I think he may be mentioned in others, in a handful of others, but I think he only appears in 2, like one of the MedStar books, I believe, and then in this book. So I don't think he's in the next book at all. So that, you know, it's either gonna have to be in this book or another one. What does Perhy? How many does Perhy? How many is Perhy in? Okay, yeah, he's only in Shadowhunter, this book, and then he's mentioned in Prey and Millennium Falcon. Okay, so yeah, he's not in the next book. So yeah, it either has to be done now or not at all. And I don't think he dies in the lore at all at any point, so that's also a bit... Anyway, do I have anything else to say on this chapter? Not really. Not really. Where's the fourth droid? Because no, only 3 came into the room, and I5 said there were 4. So where's that 4th one? Anyway, I'm going to end the review here because I have much else to say. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. I've just read chapter 40 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. We only have 6 more chapters to go now. So we pick up literally where we left off. Jax is... Now, apparently the transfer seal window hasn't broken yet, but one more blast and it will. And Jax is trying to connect to the Force, and of course, he can't connect to it again. He barely has... And he of course starts panicking, and then the window blows open, and it's said Lamont deflects the incoming shrapnel, but of course that's the least of their problems. And Jax just has to act in the moment. An 88 droid is coming up. So Jax charges forwards and slides across the floor. And then swings at the 88 droid's neck. And his lightsaber doesn't necessarily cut the droid's neck off, but it does kind of weld all the circuits and stuff in there together, and he falls down and knocks over some droids on the way up. Then there's 2 other droids coming up, and Jax is really just thinking that no, he's a Jedi, he has to protect everyone, but how is he meant to be a Jedi without the Force? And that's when he and this very much took me back to Last of the Jedi, because these kind of moments happen, I wouldn't say frequently, but every couple books we'd actually get these in Last of the Jedi, and it was a flashback to a lesson that Evan Peel gave him. And I absolutely love how Evan Peel was characterised in this lesson. It's not like Last of the Jedi where it can extend out for quite a while. Actually, no, it's actually roughly around the length of what it was in Last of the Jedi, actually. The flashbacks never really lasted that while in those books. But, you know, the way Michael Reeves characterised Evan Peel here is exactly how I imagined Evan Peel would look. He always looked a little bit mean, he never looked to be like the Collins soft kind of type. And I love that Michael Reeves kind of plays into that here, and he's telling Jax that a Jedi doesn't need the Force, that the Force doesn't define a Jedi. And I'm just going to read out the conversation, because it's much better to just read it out, especially with his characterization. Even without the Force, you are still a Jedi. The Force aids a Jedi's power, Master Peel told him. It completes the Jedi's training, but the Force alone does not make a Jedi. That comes from a deeper place. But the Force sets us apart, makes us unique. He, that being Jax, had stammered. Without it, how are the Jedi different? The Lanix reply had been typically acerbic. What? What am I talking to myself here? Pay attention. You know, that very much sounds like what I would imagine what Evan Peel would say. The Force obeys you. It doesn't define you. Before it laid claim to you, you were then who you are now. Otherwise, it would not have chosen you as its vessel. Understand? And then the shadow comes up from behind Jax. And he winds up being picked up by a droid, and it starts to try and choke him. It grabs his lightsaber wielding hand, and then I5 shoots the droid down. And we're given a little moment of payoff Because earlier in the book, I5 mentioned that maybe you should thank a nav computer, and maybe that will, maybe earlier. And we play that line off with saying that, with Jax saying, well, under some circumstances, maybe you should thank the nav computer. And I5 says it can make for a safer trip. And then everything kind of quiets down again. And asks if that's all of them. And Lance says, like, yes, for now, but there'll definitely be more coming soon. And they're about to continue when Labyrinth senses something. She goes to draw her blasters, but she can't even get them out of her holster before they're all enveloped in a cold blue flame. And that's where we end the chapter. It was, again, it was nice to kind of focus a little bit more on Jax losing his Force connection. This chapter was really showing us how, Jax at first is trying to fight without his Force connection, but he's so desperate to have that Force connection with him. To him, as we're told, to Jax, the Force is what defines the Jedi. And we see about how much he's struggling without it, and he's panicking a little bit because he can't anticipate where blast bolts are coming from. I'll be honest, in Star Wars lore, I hate that you have to be able to sense where the blast bolts are coming in. With bullets, actual bullets, yeah, I can maybe understand that because they are blindingly fast, but with blast bolts in Star Wars, the way at least we see them in the movies, you'd definitely be able to see them coming and would be able to, get your lightsaber in the way in time without having to sense them where they're coming from. That's a bit of lore that I never really liked, because it's always, in Star Wars, you are able to see where the blaster bolts are coming from. Yes, they're going to be fast, but you can see them coming in anyway. That's a piece of lore I've never been massively keen on. But, you can't anticipate where the bolts will be coming in. What does it say specifically at one point? Let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah, Jax is bleeding as well now from the broken transparent steel, and that's also kind of puts him more into his panic of he needs to protect everyone, and he can't because it's another force. His grip on his lightsaber slowly not being able to properly grip because his hands are bloodied, etc. I can't find it now. But yeah, it brings up about how there's various things that you have the Force for, like deflecting blast bolts, to just, and of course Jax, he's completely familiar with fighting with the Force aiding him, and every time it disappears it always shocks him, and he's never really been able, as you can kind of tell, he's never really been able to fight without the Force aiding him in some way. And you see how he's really struggling. And then of course we have the flashback, and he looks to get a lot more confidence after that. And even though he does wind up almost getting killed, we also have that moment with I5 and him. And I think this is probably going to be like the turning point for Jax and I5. It's definitely based on just how Jax reacted and gave that remark back to I5. I think he's definitely not warming up to I5 just because he saved his life yet. But I feel like that's kind of going to be the point of turning around. I feel like Jax is going to start warming up to I5 again. I think he's gonna again, not again, but you know what I mean. He's gonna start. I think he's now going to start warming up to it. Um, like I'll be honest, I did have a little peek to the very end of the book just because I wanted to see how many pages there were. Now decided to have a look at the last line. It looks like Jax is going to ask Sky 5 about his father. So okay, I only was looking at the end of the book just to check how many pages there were, but yeah, it's yeah, this was quite. I mean, this was a nice. It was a good chapter. It was a good chapter. I really want to try and find that line. Here it is. The blaster began firing, sweeping the room. As soon as the 88's upper body cleared the edge, Jax knew he had only seconds in which to act. He couldn't trust his ability to anticipate and block the blast, so he dived forward. Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Okay. Um, we're told that Jax is fighting panic, etc. when the Force doesn't answer him, and so yeah, it was a really good chapter exploring a little bit more with Jax and his confidence and ability to fight with and without the Force. So yeah, not really a whole lot to talk about this chapter though. So yeah. Anyway, I'm going to end not the chapter here. I'm going to end the review here. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Also, yeah, I'm recording this review the following day from the previous two reviews that will probably be in this video because I forgot to upload and edit together that video last night. So yeah. Anyway, bye.